this is my 1970 Dodge Challenger. If you haven't seen my build series yet, I swapped in a Gen 3 Hemi I pulled out of a Dodge Durango and a 6-speed manual transmission. I cammed it, I dyno tuned it, pretty much the works. You can see all about it right here. And today I'm excited to finally be doing an upgrade that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, and maybe make this thing a little bit more track ready. I have a front and rear big brake kit from Wilwood to install. 12.1 inch rotors, 4-piston calipers on all 4 corners. It's gonna be awesome. Basically the biggest brakes that I can fit inside my 15-inch wheels. Because I love the look of my 15-inch wheels and I refuse to give them up. All right, so I've unboxed all of this stuff already. Let's get to it. So let's take a look what we got here. All right, there we go. Awesome. Now, one thing I opted not to go with were the cross-drilled and slotted rotors, which they did offer for, I want to say like an extra 100 or 200 or something like that. Of course, I didn't want to spend the extra whatever it was for both kits, but they say that with modern brake pad technology, it doesn't really help much. I guess older types of brake pads needed to off-gas a lot more than modern ones, so it was sort of an important thing if you were doing hard braking. I'm not sure if it's true or not, but one point they did make was that modern Formula One cars do not have cross-drilled and slotted rotors. They do use solid rotors like these. So based on that, I went ahead and went with just solid rotors in these guys. All right, and I guess these are the calipers. Yes, they are. All right, there you go. Look at that thing. 4-piston, looks good. Made in USA, which I like. And one thing I noticed right off the bat is that all of this stuff is pretty light. Maybe we'll weigh things like the front calipers versus, the stock Dodge calipers. I'd be curious to see how much weight or, if we're saving any weight between the two setups. More stickers, of course. And, these are this is the parking brake setup, which uses actually I believe the inner bit of this brake caliper here as kind of like a drum brake for your parking brake. Obviously, being a street car, I did pay for the extra parking brake setup, so that's cool. All right, well, I guess it's time to install this thing. So I'm gonna have to jack up the rear end, and I will have to pull out the axles, but luckily that's actually pretty easy on this 8 3/4 rear axle. I don't have to open up the center section. I can just unbolt the retainers, take out all that drum brake stuff, and the axle should slide right out. So every last bit of drum brake stuff has been taken off here. I got this diagram here. It looks pretty simple. Just this thing goes on first, which is sort of the holder for the parking brake, and I guess kind of like a backing plate or retainer, maybe. Oh, I guess not. I guess the axle retainer. The axle retainer's right there, but I think I see what we got to do here. So I got to take off this snap ring here. And once that's off, then I can replace basically this retainer ring with this new retainer ring and the parking brake thing here too. Awesome. So it looks like this guy fits in there perfectly in that snap ring. And this piece here it seems like it can be added after, since it has this cutout right here. So I think the next step is to put the axle back in. I think this was the only piece I needed to put on when the axle's out. right, well that went on pretty well. It was a little bit tight getting this thing because the holes are very, very precise, but everything seemed to be machined pretty well. Not much left to do, it seems like. Put the caliper on, put the, connect this parking brake thing. But before I go any further, I'm gonna actually just quickly bolt the caliper up, and I'm gonna see if these wheels fit. I know that it's gonna be very, very close. It says that this kit should fit most 15-inch wheels. So let's bolt that on, and it's gonna be the moment of truth here soon. All right, we are good. Yeah, these fit great. There's no signs of any rubbing or anything like that. And man, look at that. You can just see that Wilwood name pop through the little cutouts in my wheels. That's awesome. That's like that worked out really well. I was considering getting the red calipers. You can order these in both black and red calipers, and I thought it would look pretty cool with my reddish orange paint, but I thought that would be a little bit overboard. That's kind of more of like an Italian car thing, so I just went with the black sort of like, more discreet look here. But I don't know if you can tell, there seems to be actually plenty of room in there. Here, let's see if I can get a shot behind this thing. All right, there you go. Yeah, you can see that there's plenty of clearance in there. And I can get my finger in between the wheel and the caliper, so I would say that's like more than enough room. I was really expecting it. Yeah, I was really expecting this to be like right on the edge of the wheel. When I measured it, I mean, I was down to like the fraction of an inch, because they give you a chart online. They say, here's all the clearance you need. And I did my best to measure like the inside widths or, whatever the dimensions of my wheel. And I was really worried it would be scraping the edge of the caliper, but it seems like there's more than enough room. And I could have even had a much smaller wheel, and I think it probably would have been okay. So, all right, let's get this thing all finished up. We got this register fitting on here, this little sort of adapter thing fitting on here, pretty snug. I definitely had to like sand down the rust pretty much completely. I had to actually really clean this one quite a bit. So I very carefully, sanded it and then used my Dremel to kind of like really clean off all of that rust. I want to say that maybe this was just a little bit too small, this register here, but I know that I don't want it to move around at all. That's kind of defeating the purpose of the register, but however, my next problem is that these bolts here are bigger than this guy. I don't know what size these are, maybe like 1/2 inch, and it's just too small. And they did warn about that in the directions. They said, just drill out these holes if needed, and in my case, it is needed because of this little collar here. It's kind of a bummer, but no big deal. Just a 5/8 drill bit and we'll be in business. There we go, nice and flush. Yep, that seemed to work out good. I didn't worry too much about getting these, dead straight. The instructions mentioned to take these into a machine shop and have them like machine drilled, but the reality is that the register here is what keeps this centered, so they're not being centered by these lug bolts. I did check my drum brakes, and those holes weren't like perfectly centered on those. There was still a little bit of movement, so this is actually pretty much solid. There is no movement there. So just drilling these out with the standard hand drill seemed to be just fine here. And I think we're just about there. One thing I'm gonna do is replace these brake lines. This side here is a new brake line. I bought that when I was doing the axle, but it's all wobbly and kind of not great looking. And the other side, I don't know if you can tell, but the other side is the original brake line, which is like, there you go, very old and rusty. So I did go ahead and pick myself up a pair of brand new brake lines here. And these are actually the last brake lines of the entire system that haven't been replaced. So I'm gonna go ahead and install this shorter one here, and then we'll get this caliper hooked up. right, I got this passenger side all installed here, and this one bolted up pretty much exactly the same. I had to clean this quite a bit, you know, definitely smooth this out, get all the rust off, and got it fitting on there good. Got the holes drilled out here to 5/8. And this brake rotor here is fitting exactly in the middle of this caliper. They do supply you with a bunch of, I guess you call them shims, like washers, so you can sort of fine adjust where your caliper sits. So you can actually move it this way by shimming it out. And I guess actually you can only move it one way, which is kind of towards the inside of the car, by putting those little spacers in between the bracket and this caliper here. And for this one, it seems like with 0 shims, it's perfectly in the middle. However, as you can see with this guy, it's not centered. So there's actually a pretty decent gap there, and then there's almost no gap here. It's just really, really close. Unfortunately, the shims only work to move it inward. I can't actually shim it outward. You know, when you first order these, you're supposed to measure your axle offset. And I tried really hard, but you actually have to pull the axle out, remove all your drum brakes, remove your backing plate. And it's actually quite an ordeal. So that's strange that I have 2 different bracket sizes on here. So I guess my next step is to pull this bracket off here and exchange it for a different sized one so I can get this thing fitting like it should. All right, so it's the next day, and I did go and trade in my bracket, or I guess my bracket spacer, for what I think is the correct one, the shorter bracket. So to show you the difference here, you can see this one was the original one, and this guy's quite a bit shorter. So let's get this guy installed, and we'll see where it puts us. All right, so I got this kind of partially bolted up here. Still loose, but it'll give you an idea. I kind of hold it in place. Pretty much exactly centered on there. So I'm gonna fully bolt these guys in, you know, with Loctite and all that stuff, and I think we'll be good to go. You know, before I call it quits for the day, there's one last thing I'm not quite sure about on this guy, and that's how to connect my emergency brake cable to the, I guess the emergency brake sort of system in here. This is how the original cable this is the original cable, and this connected to the brake drum shoe. And this one seems to be, the new one that is, seems to be a different style right there. So obviously this is like a little, I guess kind of like a little hook or something. It's not like a fork like the other one. So I'm not sure how you're supposed to connect this guy. I suppose like a little adapter or something, you know. I'll have to do some research and figure out how that's supposed to work. I'm hoping there's some sort of solution there. I mean, there must be. I guess we'll see. All right, well, it's a few days later, and I did solve the mystery of the parking brake cable. And the official solution is just to buy new parking brake cables. I'm kind of a little bit annoyed by that because my parking brake cables are fine. There isn't really any reason why I couldn't use these, you know, with some sort of adapter or something. So that's something I kind of wish I would have known about ahead of time, you know. It's kind of the same thing with all these adapters, you know, like out of the box, none of these hoses plug directly into the factory stuff. Pretty much all cars use these flared fittings. And I ended up having to buy all kinds of these adapters here, which, you know, they're not terribly expensive, but they're definitely way more expensive than they should be. So I'll say it's kind of annoying. So I did just go ahead and buy the kit from Wilwood, the new parking brake cable kit. Anyway, this should give me everything I need. Hopefully, it better have everything I need to set me up here. That's sort of my rant. Let's get to it. Okay, here we go. So we got the shorter side, driver's side, and the longer passenger side here. And it looks like these are kind of like a cut to length sort of deal because they're obviously way longer than both of them. So yeah, I think it's simple enough. Just cut them to the same length as the originals and I should be good. Actually, I'll get them set up first and then I'll figure out the length that I need. All right, so it looks like that's pretty much good to go on this side. Just got it bolted onto this. Got this new adapter piece connected to the, whatever this thing is, the little lever. So I suppose I got to figure out my routing and just cut it off, hopefully in the right spot. I think this is going to be one of those measure twice, cut once sort of scenarios. All right, onto the fronts. I'm hoping the fronts go a little bit easier. Since these are already disc brakes, and of course there's no e-brake to deal with, no brake hard lines to replace here, I think this should go pretty quick. I'm hoping I don't have any trouble with like the wheel bearings and all that stuff. I don't know what needs to get pressed in or pressed out. Hopefully nothing does, but I guess we'll see here soon. So first things first, I want to double check that this bearing that came with the Wilwood kit, it's the inner bearing here, does fit on my spindle. Yes, it does. Whew. And there is one part that does need to be pressed in, but I do see it already. Actually, this thing here, this is the front kind of, I don't know, whatever, hub adapter thing with the actual rotor bolts to. And there is this inner bearing race, which looks like it's already pressed in there. So I think we're good. I don't think there's anything I need to like bring to the shop to have pressed in here. Should just be a pretty simple bolt up and we'll be set. All right, so I got the rotor on, I got the bearings all packed, and I got the main wheel, nut, whatever, put on there and tightened down to the right factory specs. And I got the caliper on here, and it seems like it's kind of the same deal as the rear ones, where you can actually move it just a little bit with shims. And they suggest starting out with 3 shims, which is what I got going here. And it's actually pretty close. Maybe it's just a little bit too far outward. I don't know if you can tell, but you can kind of see with this little center line here. It's probably a little bit too far outward, which means I probably have one, maybe two too many shims in there. So I think I'll pull this off and remove one, and I should be good to go. All right, there we go, all set. Got the brake pads in, calipers mounted, everything's good. Now I get to do it all over again on the passenger side. So, you know, one thing I couldn't help noticing when I was pulling apart all of this old disc brake stuff was just how heavy these parts are. I mean, this, you know, this brake rotor here is pretty hefty. It's like, I don't know, like cast iron or whatever. And all this Wilwood stuff is actually, it seems like it's a lot lighter. A lot of aluminum stuff there. The brackets are just smaller and lighter. I have all of the Wilwood stuff here, including the hardware and all that stuff still in boxes. And I'm gonna first weigh all the original stuff. I'm guessing it's gonna save quite a few pounds here. I guess we'll find out. $38.8 pounds. That's for the original stuff. Wow, 19.4 pounds. That's incredible. That's pretty much half the weight, if I got that right. Is that exactly half the weight, 19.4? Hold on. That is exactly half the weight. That's incredible. That's actually a huge weight savings. I'm taking almost 40 pounds off the front of my car, and it is unsprung weight, meaning that it's some of the few parts that are, you know, part of the suspension which don't bounce up and down. I don't remember what that means exactly, but I know that it's, I think it's better to remove unsprung weight. Well, it's good. It's good to remove weight, so we'll leave it at that. Wow, that's awesome. That was something I really didn't think about, how much lighter this Wilwood stuff would be compared to the factory disc stuff. All right, got this side all set up here, finished, looking good. There's definitely a lot of air in the lines because I guess all 4 calipers are empty, and as you can see, the brake fluid's been leaking when I undid these connections. So I'm gonna use my power brake bleeder, which is this guy right here. I've used this a couple times before. It's pretty cool. It's basically, the idea is that you seal this plate on top of your master cylinder. You can actually kind of see the outline of my master cylinder already on there. This is going to pump fluid into the, I guess, like the front and the rear or whatever. And you pressurize this thing with a pump, which has some brake fluid in it. And then you just crack the bleeder valve, and it actually pushes fluid through your system as opposed to trying to pull it through with like a vacuum, or to have somebody sit there pumping the brakes for hours. That's one big advantage of this system. You can do it by yourself. You don't need to torture somebody sitting there pumping your brakes for you. So I'm gonna get this set up, and we'll see how it goes. So I got this thing pumped up. I did spring a leak somewhere around like 10 PSI or so. I think a good PSI to run is about 15 if you can get it. I'm at about like 12 or 13, and I'm gonna go ahead and crack one of the rear bleeders and see what comes out. All right, they say to start with the caliper that's furthest from the master cylinder. So this is the right rear over here. All right, so all 4 corners are bled. I I made a huge mess, as usual, with this power brake bleeder thing. That's the one sort of drawback about this brake bleeder, is that it's really hard to get it to seal on the master cylinder. I'll get in there and wash it off. So let's give it a try. All right. It feels pretty good. Feels firm. Yeah, it seems to be holding pressure. That's good. Now I guess the real question is, do we have any leaks? Looks okay there. Everything looks good. Good there. Wow. I'm less worried about the fronts. The fronts are a little bit easier to seal. The fronts look good. I think it's my lucky day. All looks pretty good. Awesome, that's lucky. That's a relief. So my first test drive is basically just gonna be maybe take it for a spin around the block and then double check for leaks and all of that. But one thing I wanna do very shortly after is adjust this proportioning valve. So the idea is that the majority of your stopping power comes from your front brakes, and you actually want to adjust for that. So if it's set up at like 50-50, you know, equal pressure all around, then your rears are gonna lock up long before your fronts, and that's definitely not good. So the idea is to bring your car up to speed, slam on the brakes, and see which ones lock up first. And obviously if your rears are locking up first, you need to turn that knob to put more power into your fronts until the point where your fronts start locking up, and then you want to back it off until pretty much all four are locking up together, which is going to give you the best like equal stopping power for your car. So I'm gonna have to go out to like a parking lot or something. I'm gonna be like screeching the tires, so hopefully I don't draw attention to myself. So we'll see what we can do. All right, pads are broken in, double checked everything. No leaks, we're looking good. Let's get this proportioning valve adjusted. The official way to do this is to get up to 30 miles an hour, slam on your brakes, and see which one locks up first. The first step here, all right, so the first step here is to adjust it in the counterclockwise direction, just to move all of the bias to the front, and then we'll back it off slowly until the rear tires start locking up. All right, let's give this a try. All right, we definitely locked the fronts up, so let's give this thing a few cranks and we'll see what that does.